Dr. Laurin, for joining me today for some conversation.
Yeah, it's super excited to talk to you and see where this goes.
How do you sort of manage the divide between theoretical work and more applied work and make the choices about where you're going to focus your own interests?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question, and I think it's one that a lot of people struggle with. Some people come into academia with the goal of doing applied work and really making a difference in the world, but a lot of people come into academia because they're nerds who like to think about ideas, and I am definitely one of the latter. And so I often find that I gravitate more towards trying to answer theoretical questions or trying to sort of, I'm like tend to be more driven by wanting to contribute to sort of knowledge as opposed to contribute to solutions. And sometimes that makes me feel bad about myself because I look around me and I see lots of people in my life whose work whose academic or non-academic work is really, making a difference, a more visible difference in the world than me. And so sometimes it's a struggle for me, but I try to remember that all of my training and all of my sort of the things that I'm good at lend themselves more to thinking about ideas. And then I try to, when I'm, I try to remember that my students is one way that I do have an impact on the world. Actually, a much more micro version than a lot of people get to say, but I really try to put in the work with my students and give them everything I have to make their lives and careers better and help them, become who they want to be. And then that sort of can satisfy the desire I have that I think we all have to make a positive impact.
Yeah, so can you tell me a little bit more about that? It's a bit refreshing to hear that someone with all of your accomplishments still has these feelings of, is it enough? Am I doing enough? Am I contributing enough? I think, there's so much in the world that we might want to improve. How do you handle maybe some of that self-doubt or those feelings of inadequacy?
I mean, I think that, first of all, I think that feelings of self-doubt or inadequacy are kind of inevitable no matter what. And I think that it perhaps gets worse as you go, because when you go from being an undergraduate to a grad student, let's say, it can be hard because suddenly you're not getting grades every 2 seconds anymore. And so there's not really as much of a clear feedback loop to let you know how you're doing. And so then you have to struggle for that reason, on top of the fact that you went from being sort of in the higher ranks of your undergraduate, the comparisons with other undergraduates, to like a more funneled group of people who are all more academically inclined. So it's less clear, how well you're doing all of a sudden. And then you become a faculty member, and it's again not clear how well. It's even less clear how well you're doing, because at least when you're a grad student, you have a cohort of people who are at your institution all at your same stage, who you can kind of get a sense of like, okay, I'm keeping up, right? Or I'm not, or I'm whatever it is that you feel. But then when you become a faculty member, often it's just you at your stage. And so it's really hard to know kind of like, how well am I doing? And then what I would say about things like awards, I don't want to, I don't know exactly how to say this. So I think of awards in a similar way as you might think of with grades, right? Grades are supposed to be very highly correlated with how much you know, right? And how well you've learned the material. But there are people who are good at taking tests. And so if you get a really good grade, how much of that is because you've really learned properly and like are, an expert in this material? And how much of it is just that you're good at taking tests and kind of, how to navigate that world? And you can think of awards in the same way, right? Like, I think people make a lot of effort to try to make sure that awards go to the right people, but then some people, like, it's hard to make sure that the award is necessarily going to exactly the right person. So just because you got an award doesn't mean that you're the best person. It could just be that you're good at writing award applications. And so what I'm trying to say is, like, there's no amount of achievement or accomplishment I think that's going to fully reassure you that you are, what you aspire to be. And I think I try to think less about that and more about, am I happy with how my life feels? And am I happy with what I'm working on? And am I happy with the feelings that I get every day with all the things that I do, work and non-work. And I can know with a lot more certainty about that than I can know, you know, whether anything else about my career per se.
Earlier you mentioned the idea that you get to make a difference on a micro level and specifically working with students. Can you tell me a little bit about your approach to inspiring students and to sharing some of you know, this knowledge that you've gained and these experiences that you've had?
Yeah, I don't know if I should share this or not, but I discovered a few months ago that they call me Mama K, my grad students. And then some of them, they like teach their undergrads to call me Grandmama K, which is a bit weird, I think, but I think it's, it as much as I found it strange, it also, I found it touching, and it made me feel like, yeah, like I am, you know, the way that I feel, which is that I do a lot to support them and encourage them, seems to be translating. So, so that felt nice. I mean, I think my attitude with grad students is that I'm not there to tell them what to do. I'm there to help them figure out what they want to do. Whether that means they want to spend every waking moment of their lives doing research and I'm trying to keep up with them, or that means that they, you know, want to have a bit more of a balance in their lives. I try to make sure that they know what, you know, what the consequences of all these kinds of decisions that they could make would be, but I fully support, you know, however it is that they want to live. And then I think in terms of kind of more concretely with research, I much more often than not, they come to me with ideas as opposed to me telling them like, hey, I have this idea, like, let's do it. But I really enjoy the process of working with them to refine ideas. And same thing with experimental methods. I really enjoy the process of working with them to refine the experimental methods. Same thing with papers. I really enjoy the process of helping them. Like, I want them to write the papers, but I also want the papers to be as good as they can be. And so I have a lot of patience for going back and forth, like, yeah, about ideas, about designs, about papers, and all of that to really like help them get themselves to where, you know, their work is as good as it can be.
Now, is this a path that you always knew you wanted to pursue, or at some point did you struggle or question what you wanted to do with your life?
No, I remember in high school, we had like a whole class that was career counseling that was, you know, once a week basically for 3 years. And I remember the day that we learned kind of about the structure of higher education, and I wrote and or said to everyone, like, I don't know who does a PhD, like, that's crazy. What, you know, what could you possibly still need to know after you've done an undergrad and a master's degree? So that this definitely wasn't like a lifelong ambition for me. But what I found was that through actually the sort of undergraduate research participation program at my undergrad, so like where you participate in research in exchange for credit, like a little course credit, or sometimes it's a requirement for the course, I got into research, and through learning about it through my courses. And so I volunteered as an undergrad RA, and then I really enjoyed that. So when I was offered a paid position, I took that. And then I was thinking, man, like, I really like what I'm doing here. How can I do more of it? Oh, I guess you go to grad school. But then even in grad school, like, I think my focus has always been, what am I doing right now? And is it do I want to keep doing that? Like, I know that even when I was in grad school, I was very aware of things like the job market and things like, you know, how difficult it could be to get an academic job, and also the sacrifices that some people sometimes have to make to get an academic job, you know, living somewhere they don't want to live or moving around a bunch of places. And I was always aware that, like, it could be an option for me to just not, you know, to do something else instead if the academic path wasn't bringing me to a life that I thought I would like. You know, and so basically it wasn't until I got some job offers, then I was like, okay, I am committed now to this life and being a professor, because I've got some evidence that it's going to work now, as opposed to before that, I always kind of felt like I wanted to keep my options open.
Now, what does this life look like for you now? Because the path of an academic can take many different forms.
Yeah. I think I have to say, I think I'm super lucky to be living in a place that I love and working in a department that I love. So Vancouver is an amazing city. And my colleagues at UBC, I love so much. So I think I'm really lucky. And I'm from Canada, and I'm in Canada now, which again is like not everybody gets to pick the country that they want to be in. So it's really, like I said, lucky. Another thing that I think is really lucky about the life I get to live is that my colleagues all, while they, you know, care about their work and care about their professional lives and care about, you know, the standing of the department and things like that, also really are good role models in terms of work-life balance. And I think that's something that's always been really important to me. So I'm glad to be in a place that encourages that. So my life definitely looks like a lot of work, but it also definitely looks like a lot of play, you know, when there are opportunities to do things. One of the great things I think about the academic life is that the schedule is kind of all yours to make for the most part. And so I find, like this afternoon, for instance, I'm going mountain biking with one of my colleagues who's also a friend. So I'm not going to be working this afternoon, but then I'll probably be working this evening instead, or something like that, you know, and that kind of flexibility in being able to choose when you want to work and when you want to do other things instead is something that I wouldn't trade for anything.
So far, you've mentioned this idea of having a lot of flexibility in the academic career, but also with that comes the ability to really manage your own time and to be pretty self-directed, also in choosing to pursue different research interests. The same thing, you had mentioned, you know, that you're not getting the constant feedback, so you really have to be able to motivate yourself and drive yourself. Are there other skills or characteristics that you think are important to the life of a researcher or a scientist?
Yeah, I'll just say a bit more about that. I remember when I started my first faculty job, the freedom of it was crushing. Like all of a sudden, there was no one telling me what to do. I was making money. I was teaching, but like not that much, luckily. And there was no one to sort of vet my research ideas. And so I literally, and I had no cohort to compare, like, oh, are we supposed to be working now? Are we supposed to be taking time off now? So it really felt like I could do anything I want. And that feeling for like a couple of months meant like I just didn't know what I wanted to do or what to do. So that was an interesting experience that I was not prepared to have. But I think that, so you're asking me about other skills that are important in the academic life. I think coping with uncertainty and coping with failure would be two of them. Like, you get rejected a lot and it never feels good, and you can't have too much of an avoidant reaction to rejection and failure, right? Like, if failing at something makes you want to kind of put it down and walk away forever, then this is going to be hard for you. And so you need to instead be able to, you know, acknowledge the pain of the rejection. You know, if you submit a paper and you thought it was really good and it comes back and all the reviewers hated it, okay, like sulk about that for a couple of days, that's fine. But then you need to be able to turn that into something constructive. And that's how I try to think about all of the many failures that I've had in my life, right? There's always something to learn from reviewers hating your paper. There's always something to learn from something not going well. And if you can see it as in that way, and I know that sounds like much easier said than done, but it really does make a difference if that's your attitude. Like, it just makes everything part of the process and part of the journey. And so I try to teach that to my students as well. Like I had a student get her master's thesis rejected from a journal a few days ago, and she forwarded me the email, and I just said exactly that. Like, take a few days to be sad about it, and then when you're ready, like, let's regroup and see what we can learn from these reviews to make the paper even better. And I think, yeah, that's definitely something you can teach yourself to do.
I'm hearing you talk about how you can frame your own experiences and use them as motivation. And so, going back to your own research interests, how do your own personal beliefs, your own sense of identity shape or frame how you research, the topics that you choose, the methodologies that you select, the way you interpret the findings? How do you think, you know, your own personal beliefs and experience influence those things?
I think that's a real big challenge. And I think more, depending on your research field, that can be more or less true. So because a lot of the things that I research or that I study have to do with, you know, ideologies and moral values and things that we hold really dear, like I am not immune myself to having my political ideology and my moral values and things like that. And so I think of it more as a risk. Well, I think of it, this is actually a struggle sometimes. So on the one hand, you can think, well, I don't want my ideologies to influence my, you know, my research and my interpretations of findings. Like I want to have a more objective kind of scientific view of things. And for the most part, that's how I see things. But then there, of course, there's another part of me that feels like, but my side is right, you know, and why shouldn't I pick the research questions and do the research that's going to show, you know, that my side is right. And so balancing those two things and, you know, being aware that trying to figure out how to balance the need for objectivity in science with also the consequences of that science on the world, and, you know, thinking about how people are going to interpret your findings and use them in you know, political ways, can be a challenge.
Just some institutions have formal mentoring programs for students, but many don't. For an undergrad or grad student who may be watching this video, what suggestions would you have, or maybe even just questions for them to think about in terms of how you begin to look for or identify a mentor? It could be someone who you have an official mentoring-mentee title relationship with, or even a more informal one.
Yeah, so I mean, I think a mentor, I think an ideal mentor, and maybe I just think this because this is the kind of mentor I try to be, but I think a mentor is someone who like doesn't have a material interest in your success, but has maybe a more selfless interest in it. So someone who not necessarily is going to stand to gain by you doing certain things, because I think in that case, they're going to have more, they're going to be more tempted to try to direct you in a certain way that they want you to go, as opposed to what I think you want a mentor to do is to help you figure out the direction that you want to go in. And so someone who, like someone who's actually like not your supervisor might be an even better mentor than someone who is your supervisor, because they don't have that sort of material connection with you. Someone who has had a diversity of experiences, I think can be good. So someone who, you know, if you're an undergraduate and you're looking for a mentor and you have the choice between a graduate student who was an undergrad at your institution and now is still a grad student at your institution, as opposed to, you know, a graduate student who went somewhere else for undergrad and is now at your institution, I would pick the latter, because they just have a bigger breadth of experience in terms of what, you know, what ideas they can put in your mind. Someone who has, you know, if you have any, if it's possible, like someone with a sort of a similar background to you, I think can help too, right? Like, so if you're a first generation student and there's a first generation grad student or faculty member, like what, you know, that's amazing. They might be able to offer you some tips from a perspective that you would share that somebody else who came from a family of, you know, super educated people might not even think to talk to you about.
Well, thank you so much. Your passion for psychology certainly comes through in all of your responses to my questions today. Thank you so much for setting aside this time. I've really enjoyed our conversation.